GMU-MBA633 Excel tutorial 3, prepared by Professor Amit Tata, School of Management, George Mason University. In this tutorial we are going to see how to prepare a histogram using Excel. It's nothing but a bar chart, but for ratio scale data as opposed to qualitative data that we had before. So we are using the same Shopper's worksheet that we have been using throughout the first two tutorials, and you can see here we have a list of 50 customers, and we already know what internet browser they used for their online shopping. And now we have a new column which tells us how many dollars they spent when they went shopping online. And essentially we're trying to get an idea of the distribution of monies that was spent online by the different customers. Now notice the difference when we were trying to get a sense of the distribution of browsers, that is how many customers were using each of the different types of browsers. We knew going in that there were only 3 types of browsers, so we knew that there were going to be 3 bars in the bar chart. It's just that we had to figure out the heights of the 3 bars. Now if you look at the amounts that were spent, theoretically the amounts that were spent online, the dollar amount, could vary anywhere from 0 to infinity, or realistically speaking, let's say between $10 and $60. They're just too many values. So unless you bucket them, unless you put them in ranges, you're simply not going to be able to get bars of any reasonable height. Each bar is going to be of height 1. If you have 50 customers, it's entirely possible that each customer spent a slightly different amount than the other, and you would have 50 bars each of height 1, which is pretty meaningless. It's not information that you can digest in any reasonable manner. So really, when you prepare a histogram, it's like making a bar chart in many respects. The only difference, and rather the major difference up front, is that you have to prepare buckets of the values. So identify the buckets and then figure out how many customers fall into each bucket in terms of the amount spent. So let's see first of all how you would go about preparing the buckets, which is the important part in doing the histogram. So the first step in preparing the buckets is to figure out the lowest value and then the highest value. That tells us the range, and that forms the basis for judging how many buckets you need to have. So let's see here what the low and high values were for the amount spent. I'm going to use the built-in function maximum and minimum in order to do that. So equal to min of all the dollar amounts spent. So the lowest amount that was spent online by these 50 customers was $17.84. The highest amount is obtained by using the built-in function max. And that is $158.51. So the range of values is obviously the difference between the two. So $140.67. So that range gives me some basis for judging how many buckets I need. This is somewhat a matter of judgment. Just think about it. If you have too few buckets, you will not get a sense of the distribution of values, distribution of amounts spent, and it will be too coarse a categorization. On the other hand, if you have too many buckets, again, the patterns will be spread too thin. You will not get a good sense. So the more you practice with these things, the more numbers, rather the more data sets for which you build histograms, you'll get a sense of what constitutes a good number of buckets. Obviously, it depends on the number of values that you have. If you had 600 customers instead of 50, you could go with a higher number of buckets. You have split things too finely if you have too many buckets that are empty. Okay, that means you split it into too many groups because many of the groups are empty. On the other hand, if you have a few bars that all look about the same height, then you got things too coarse. And that's sort of a starting point from which to judge iteratively how many buckets you need. Now, in our case, we have 50 customers. I can see that the range is 140. My starting point would be, let's shoot for 5 or 6 buckets, and then see what the picture looks like. If it looks too coarse, we can always change the number of buckets. So if I want about 5 or 6 buckets, then each bucket should be about $30 large. Okay, so 5 times 30, 150, that covers the range. So I will start the lowest bucket by putting in the value 15 for no other reason than 15 is a nice number which is lower than $17.84. I can be sure that I will be including $17.84. If my bucket size is 30, then the next bucket should start at 45 and so forth. Now I could go on calculating and typing the other buckets, but in Excel there is a nice way to do this. I just highlight these 2 buckets and take my cursor to the southeast corner and just drag it down a few cells, and Excel automatically increments the buckets by the appropriate amount and puts this in. Now obviously I've highlighted too many cells. I don't need the 195. I got 165. So I got 15, 45, 75, 105, 135, 165, which covers the range from $17.84 to $158.51. Now, any bucket, if you think about it, any bucket should have a lower limit and an upper limit. What you're seeing here is the upper limits of each bucket. Okay, so once we do the histogram, then you will I will be more precise about what each of these buckets mean and how Excel interprets it. Now, before I go ahead and do the next important step, which is counting how many customers fall into each bucket, that we will do using a built-in operation called the histogram, you have to make sure that your version of Excel that you have installed on your machine has the analysis toolpack installed. The way to check that is you click on the data tab, and all the way to the right you should see this icon button which says data analysis. If you see it, you're fine, it's installed. If you don't see it, it's not installed, you need to install it. And the way you install it is you go to the office icon on the left top corner of your screen, click on it, and then go to Excel options, then click on add-ins, and you will see Excel add-ins over here. Just click on go, and then just check the boxes off which says analysis toolpack VBA, and solver add-in, and then click OK. And that will, it takes a minute or two and it will install what is needed. Okay, so just once you install it, this data analysis button will show up. All right, so coming back to where we were, we have identified the buckets, and now in the next column we want Excel to do the counting for us and tell us how many customers fall into each bucket. In order to do that, we use the histogram function that is already pre-built in. So I click on data analysis, and from the dialog box I pick up histogram and click OK. All right, as you can see, there are 2 inputs you need to give it. The first is called the input range, and that is the entire set of values that you want to put into buckets. Okay, so I highlight the whole range, and then it says, okay, tell me where your buckets are. The Excel calls them bins, so I have to tell it where my bins are. So here are my bins, 15, 45, 17. This is, remember, we went through the discussion of how you set up the bins and how you determine how many bins and so forth. Okay, and the output will show up on a new worksheet. That's the default. Click OK, and here you can see the output. Now it's extremely important that you follow what these numbers mean, the frequencies. Okay, so for example, when you see the number 0, the way you interpret is there are 0 customers who spent $15 or less. Okay, similarly, if you look at the number 13, that number 13 means that there are 13 customers who spent greater than $15 and less than or equal to 45. This less than or equal to is very important. So 45 is the upper limit of the second bin. Okay, and the lower limit is anything greater than 15. All right. Similarly, if you look at the number 8, it means that there were 8 customers who spent more than $75 and less than or equal to $105. So that is how Excel interprets the bins. Every bin, as I said, needs to have a lower and an upper limit. Okay, and Excel puts in the upper limits of the bins only. You cannot have non-contiguous bins in Excel. Okay, now that we have the counts, the frequencies, then it's an easy matter to draw the histogram. By the way, Excel puts in this default row. It says more than 165. There are 0 customers who spent more than 165. I really don't need that information. Okay, so now I take these counts and I prepare the graphical representation. So this is the tabular representation of the counts, and now I got the numbers here. I click on insert, I click on column, and let's say I pick the 3-dimensional column over here. So this is really the histogram, okay, of the dollar amount spent by different customers when they went shopping online. So let me put this on a different worksheet, a new worksheet, so I can play around with it there. And as with the bar chart for qualitative data, I want to make the x-axis more descriptive. So I right click on the object and I pick select data, pick the x-axis from the dialog box, go back and tell Excel the x-axis labels should be these bin boundaries. Okay, so I click on it and immediately you can see that the bin boundaries are put in over here. So now I know what these bars represent, that there were 25, or rather not 25, 22 or 23 customers who spent less than or equal to $75, greater than 45. Okay, so you can make meaning out of the heights of the bars. Now, one last step in histograms, it is very typical to put the bars adjacent to one another, since the bins are adjacent to one another, unlike bar charts where the bars actually are physically separate from one another. The way you change the spacing is by right clicking on any bar, okay, and then you go to format data series and make the gap 0. Okay, so here you have your histogram. And as with the bar chart, you can click on the layout tab and use all these different options to make the histogram look really pretty. You can put titles and labels and colors and highlights and things like that. Okay, so this is how you prepare a histogram for ratio scale data in Excel.